There are some connections a person can walk away from, but somehow they never completely leave the heart. Your soulmate may be beginning to understand that now. For a long time, they believed that moving forward simply meant putting distance between themselves and the past. They thought that enough time would eventually make certain memories disappear. They believed that if they stayed busy, focused on their responsibilities, and continued living their life, whatever they once felt would naturally become less important. But something unexpected happened. The memories did not disappear. They changed. At first, your soulmate may have remembered you with confusion, then with curiosity, then perhaps with a quiet sense of longing they did not know how to explain. And now they are beginning to understand why. It was not necessarily because they were unable to move forward. It was because something about the connection left a deeper impression than they realized. There are people we remember because they were part of a particular chapter. And then there are people we remember because something about knowing them changed the way we understood ourselves. Your soulmate is beginning to recognize the difference. For a long time, they tried to explain their feelings logically. They asked themselves why certain conversations remained in their memory, why certain places reminded them of you, why an ordinary song, a familiar situation, or even a random thought could suddenly bring back an emotion they believed they had already moved past. They tried to dismiss these moments. They told themselves it was nostalgia. They told themselves it was simply because the connection had ended without complete closure. They told themselves that eventually the feeling would disappear. But the more they tried to ignore it, the more they realized that something inside them was still asking to be understood. And that realization has brought them into a period of deep reflection. Your soulmate is beginning to ask themselves what you actually meant to them, not what they wanted to believe you meant, not what would be easiest to explain, but what was genuinely happening inside their heart. That question is difficult because honest answers do not always arrive conveniently. Sometimes a person realizes they cared more than they admitted. Sometimes they realize that someone brought out a softer side of them. Sometimes they realize that the reason they created distance was not because they felt nothing, but because they felt something they did not know how to handle. Your soulmate may be looking at their own past through that lens now. They are remembering moments when they could have been more open, more expressive, more present. They remember things they left unsaid, feelings they minimized, conversations they postponed, and they are beginning to recognize a pattern. Whenever they felt vulnerable, they stepped back. Whenever they sensed that their feelings were becoming stronger, they tried to regain control. At the time, they thought they were being sensible. Now they understand that sometimes they were simply afraid. Afraid of becoming attached, afraid of being disappointed, afraid of caring about someone enough that their absence could actually hurt. This realization has changed the way they see you, because perhaps they once believed that distance would make their feelings weaker. Instead, distance gave them time to understand them. They started noticing what they missed. Not only your presence, but the feeling they associated with you. Maybe it was the way conversations felt natural. Maybe it was the comfort of being understood without having to explain everything. Maybe it was the feeling that they could be more honest around you than they were with most people. Those things matter, and your soulmate is beginning to understand that. They are also realizing that not every meaningful connection is loud. Sometimes a person becomes important through small moments. A conversation that stayed in your mind, a laugh that you remember years later, a moment when someone made you feel understood, a simple interaction that seemed ordinary at the time but became meaningful afterward. Your soulmate is remembering those small things, and strangely, they now seem more important than the dramatic moments. Because drama can create strong memories, but genuine comfort creates emotional attachment. That is what they are beginning to recognize. There was something peaceful about certain moments with you, something they did not fully appreciate while experiencing it. Perhaps they were too focused on figuring out what the connection meant, Perhaps they were too worried about what might happen next. Perhaps they were not emotionally prepared to simply enjoy what was already there. Now they understand that sometimes the heart recognizes something before the mind knows how to explain it. And that may be why you remained in their thoughts. Not because they were intentionally holding on to the past, but because some part of them had not finished understanding what the connection taught them. Your soulmate is beginning to see that you were not simply another person they met. You became part of their emotional growth. You showed them something about vulnerability. You showed them something about closeness. You showed them something about what it feels like when another person reaches a part of the heart that had been carefully protected, and that can be difficult to forget. They may have tried to replace the feeling. They may have focused on other people, other priorities, other goals, other parts of life. But eventually they noticed something. Moving forward did not require pretending the connection never mattered. It required accepting that it did. That is where their healing begins. They are no longer trying to convince themselves that they felt nothing. They are allowing themselves to acknowledge the truth. They cared. They were affected. And perhaps somewhere inside them they still care. But this time they are not looking at those feelings from a place of fear. They are looking at them from a place of maturity. They understand that caring about someone does not automatically mean they must control the outcome. Love does not always need immediate answers. Sometimes the first step is simply acknowledging what is real, and your soulmate is finally becoming honest enough to do that. They are realizing that there was a reason they never completely let the connection disappear from their heart. There was a reason certain memories remained. There was a reason your presence continued to mean something even when life moved forward. Perhaps the reason was not that they were meant to remain stuck in the past. Perhaps the reason was that they were meant to learn something from what they felt. And now, they are finally beginning to understand the lesson. Some people enter our lives and teach us what we want. Others teach us what we need. And sometimes one person can do both. Your soulmate is beginning to see that your connection helped them understand what genuine emotional closeness could feel like. It made them question their defenses. It made them examine their fears. And perhaps most importantly, it made them realize that love cannot always be controlled. Sometimes you can plan your life carefully. You can protect your heart. You can avoid emotional risks. You can tell yourself you are being practical. And still, someone can enter your life and make you feel something real. Your soulmate knows that now. And that is why they are looking at the past differently. Not with desperation, not with fantasy, but with understanding. They are beginning to realize that letting go of fear does not mean letting go of love. Sometimes it means finally allowing yourself to understand why you loved in the first place. The more your soulmate accepted what they truly felt, the more another realization began taking shape. They did not actually miss the past in the way they once thought. They missed the possibility of what that connection could have become. And that distinction changed everything. For a long time, they looked backward and wondered whether they should have made different choices. Maybe they should have communicated more. Maybe they should have been more open. Maybe they should have allowed themselves to become emotionally vulnerable instead of constantly protecting their heart. But now they understand that regret alone cannot change anything. What matters is what they do with the understanding they have gained. Your soulmate is beginning to realize that emotional growth is not about becoming a completely different person overnight. It is about noticing the moments when the old version of you would have reacted one way and choosing something healthier instead. That is what they are learning now. When fear tells them to disappear, they are learning to communicate. When uncertainty makes them want to create distance, they are learning to ask questions. When they feel something deeply, they are learning not to immediately convince themselves that the feeling is dangerous. This is a quiet transformation. Nobody else may even notice it, but inside them something important is changing. They are becoming more comfortable with vulnerability. And vulnerability has always been connected to their feelings for you, because your connection made them feel seen. And being truly seen can be frightening. When someone has spent years protecting themselves, there is a difference between being noticed and being understood. Your soulmate felt that difference. They may have met many people who appreciated certain parts of them, but with you, they felt that some deeper part of their personality was being recognized. That feeling stayed with them, and now they understand why it was so difficult to replace. You cannot easily replace the experience of feeling understood. You can meet someone new. You can build new friendships. You can create new memories. But certain emotional experiences remain unique because of who you were when they happened. Your soulmate is beginning to respect that. They are not trying to force themselves to forget. They are allowing the memory to exist without allowing it to control their life. That is a much healthier form of letting go, because sometimes letting go does not mean erasing someone from your heart. It means releasing the need to rewrite the past. They no longer need to constantly ask, what would have happened if they had chosen differently? They can accept that they made the choices they made with the understanding they had at that time. Perhaps they were scared. Perhaps they were confused. Perhaps they simply needed more time to understand themselves. They can acknowledge all of that without judging themselves forever. And that self-forgiveness is important, because your soulmate is discovering that they cannot build a healthier future while constantly punishing themselves for their past. They have to learn from it. Then they have to move forward. And as they move forward, they are becoming clearer about the kind of love they actually want. They do not want emotional games anymore. They do not want relationships where they constantly have to guess what someone feels. They do not want affection that disappears whenever things become difficult. They want something honest, something steady, something where two people can speak openly without being afraid that vulnerability will automatically destroy the connection. That is the kind of love they are now beginning to value. And perhaps that is why the thought of you has started feeling different. Before, thinking about you may have created confusion. Now it creates reflection. They remember what they learned. They remember what they felt. They remember what they were unable to express. And instead of running from those memories, they are allowing them to teach them. There is also a softer realization developing. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that love is not always about possession. Sometimes you can genuinely love someone and still respect their freedom. You can care without demanding. You can miss someone without creating pressure. You can hope for another conversation without assuming what the other person wants. That emotional balance is something they did not always understand. Now they are learning it. They are learning that love becomes healthier when it is built on honesty rather than expectation. And if your paths ever cross again, they do not want to approach the moment with the same emotional patterns they carried before. They do not want to pretend nothing happened. They do not want to act as though they never cared. And they do not want to make promises simply because they are emotional in the moment. They want to be honest. That is all. Honest about what they feel. Honest about what they have learned. Honest about what they can offer. And honest about what they still do not know. That kind of honesty requires courage. But your soulmate is developing that courage. They are realizing that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop hiding behind uncertainty. If someone matters, acknowledge it. If something hurt, communicate it. If you made a mistake, own it. If you still care, do not be ashamed of that feeling. And if the future is uncertain, allow it to be uncertain without creating a false story around it. This is the emotional maturity they are moving toward. They are no longer trying to control every possible outcome. They are learning to control their own behavior. That is a much stronger form of emotional strength. And when they think about you now, there is less fear attached to the memory. There is gratitude. Gratitude for what the connection revealed. Gratitude for the moments that felt genuine. gratitude for the lessons that came from the difficult parts, and perhaps even gratitude for the distance, because distance gave them the opportunity to understand what closeness had meant. Sometimes you only recognize the value of something after you have had enough space to see it clearly. Your soulmate is seeing it clearly now. They are realizing that they did not need another person to complete them. They needed to become more complete within themselves. They needed to understand their own fears, their own patterns, their own emotional needs. And once they began doing that, their understanding of love changed too. They stopped looking for someone who would rescue them from loneliness. They started looking for a connection, where two people could bring their own wholeness and build something meaningful together. That is a much healthier kind of love, and perhaps that is why they are not rushing anymore. They understand that something genuine does not need to be forced. If there is ever another chapter, they want it to begin from clarity, not loneliness, not nostalgia, not fear, not the desire to recreate the past, but from two people who have grown enough to meet each other differently. That possibility brings them peace, because they finally understand something important. The connection did not become meaningless simply because time passed, and the passage of time does not automatically erase love. Sometimes time gives love context. It allows a person to separate genuine emotion from temporary excitement. It reveals which memories were simply moments, and which ones became part of who they are. Your soulmate is beginning to recognize where your connection belongs. It belongs among the experiences that changed them, experiences that taught them to communicate, to open their heart, to recognize emotional safety, to stop running from meaningful feelings, and perhaps most importantly, to understand that love should not be measured by how difficult it is to hold on to someone. It should be measured by how honestly two people are willing to meet each other. That is the lesson they carry now. They may not have every answer. They may still have questions. They may still be figuring out what the future should look like. But one thing has become clearer. They no longer want to live from fear. They no longer want to hide behind endless explanations. They no longer want to dismiss meaningful emotions simply because they are complicated. They want to be real. And somewhere in that new honesty is the memory of you. Not as someone they must possess, not as a chapter they must force open again, but as someone who mattered deeply enough to change the way they understand love. That realization alone can transform a person, because sometimes the heart does not need another chance to prove that something mattered. Sometimes it simply needs the courage to admit that it did. And your soulmate is finally finding that courage. They are learning that the past cannot be changed, but the person they become because of it can be. And if love ever brings your paths together again, they want to meet that moment as a wiser person, a calmer person, a more honest person. Someone who understands that when something genuine appears in front of you, you should not always run from it simply because it scares you. Sometimes you pause, sometimes you listen, sometimes you open your heart. And sometimes you finally allow yourself to say what you should have said a long time ago. You mattered to me. And perhaps that is the truth your soulmate has been slowly learning all along.